Hello everybody, how's it going today? Glowplasma 201 here, back in today to talk about Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 40 of 2024. And that's a bit of a weird sentence for me to say, because it's a sentence that I haven't said in about a year, actually, because as many of you probably know, if you are an avid fan or a watcher of this channel, maybe you've got some new viewers watching this, but who really knows? I honestly don't. But I used to do this series a lot back in the day, where I would, every week after the newest Shonen Jump issue would come out, I'd sit down on my computer and talk about it, and talk about all of the series that I read that week in the magazine. This week we actually have 13 series, which isn't like the biggest number I've ever done. I'm pretty sure like 15 to 16 is like the most I've ever read. But long story short, for a long time I actually stopped doing this Weekly Shonen Jump series for mainly one big reason, but it sort of spiraled off into a second, and that was because, as many of you probably know, I am very unreliable on getting out videos in a very good and decent time. I have a life, just like everyone else, and my life always doesn't allow me to make these fun videos, especially when these Weekly Shonen Jump videos normally take about an hour to an hour and 30 minutes just to record. And that's not editing and doing everything else that goes into making these videos, getting timestamps and all of that sort of stuff. So for a long time there, whenever I would record these videos, I had a massive backlog on them, right? And sort of my philosophy whenever it comes to recording videos is I like to record the first video I need to first. So a good example of this is like Oshinoko chapter reviews. As many of you know, I get very behind on Oshinoko, and to keep my thoughts consistent and to not like spoil anything else or get further knowledge on what happens in future chapters, I like to talk about those chapters in the context of when they had just released, right? And because of that, I don't like to read the next chapters that come out, even though if it's a series I really enjoy, until I sort of get that backlog going on and finish up all of those other reviews that happened, right? And for a while, that sort of happened to me with Weekly Shonen Jump, to where I sort of felt like it was sort of my duty, in a way, to actively go through and talk about Weekly Shonen Jump every single week like this. And for a while there, it was pretty much at the very end of last year, from about November till all the way of about March of this year. There was about 5 months where I just didn't read Shonen Jump, and it's one of my favorite hobbies to do, and it was just because I sort of got pressured, and like, I need to make these videos, so why should I be reading these other chapters? And because of that, I missed out on a lot of really awesome moments whenever they happened in the manga, right? Which isn't a terrible thing. I mean, I read plenty of series that I don't read week to week, but reading Shonen Jump week to week is really the fun that comes with it. And I didn't really like missing out on all of that. For instance, last time whenever I talked about all of this stuff, I was talking about like a bunch of manga series like Ichinose's Family Deadly Sins, Mama Yu Yu. What else was there? I'm pretty sure there was a lot that has just been changed ever since let me actually go to my old spreadsheet where I used to keep all of these series that I talked about. So yeah, so whenever I did this last time, My Hero was still running, Ichinose's Family Deadly Sins, Martial Master Asumi, Mama Yu Yu. And at that point, those series have all been canceled, actually, but like Inui's Exorcist, I wasn't enjoying that series, so I dropped it. And pretty much just to get back to what I was saying is, it's all in that sort of way where I wasn't actively reading all of these series week to week, and it's something that I really enjoy to do, so sort of not doing it really bummed me out for a while there, right? Sorry, I'm trying to reorganize my spreadsheet because I had to rewind a few things because I already set it up for today's episode. There we go. But yeah, there's a bunch of series that I want to talk about, and don't expect these videos to come out on a regular basis like they did back in the day whenever I did these for like 20 issues straight. Like, it's a lot of work to put these out, and whenever there's a particularly good issue of Shonen Jump and I have time, I would love to talk about it because I always like to talk about Shonen Jump. And last week, actually, before recording this with issue number 39, I didn't sit down and record one of these videos, but as you guys know, how this series works is I read all of the series I read in Jump, and then I rank them on my spreadsheet, right? And I just go through and rank all of the series from worst to best. All of that will be at the very end of the video where I talk about that. And last week, I was like, these are some really good chapters, and I actually recorded myself a little bit going over these videos here, right? And it's not really very put together. It's more of just like for my prosperity's sake, but maybe if you guys want to see see me put that video up, maybe I'll put it up on the channel if enough of you guys let me know, like, hey, Glowplasma, we'd really like to see that. And I'm like, okay, guys, and put some background music and just shove it on there with, like, a very crappy thumbnail or whatever, right? I actually really like making thumbnails, so I probably wouldn't make it that crappy, but either way, that sort of pushed me into reading Jump this week, going like, man, I really enjoyed that. Let me actually get back into this and make these great videos on Jump, right? But here's the thing, these Jump videos take a while to make, so I'd say that we just need to go and hop on into it. Of course, like I said, we have 13 series this week, and yeah, without further ado, let's get started with the first chapter, and that is, of course, Undead Unluck, chapter number 220. This chapter is titled Now Come On, right? So, pretty much, of course, last chapter, Andy came back. Andy is back. It is so great. He's been out of this series now for, like, almost 2 full years that we've just had Fuko being our main hero, which I love Fuko, she's awesome, but Fuko and Andy make that incredible tag team. And something here really interesting in this first panel is it looks like the author Yoshifuma Tezuka is going back to that first scene wherever Andy and Fuko met on the on that Shinjuku bridge there, where Fuko was getting ready to kill herself, and Andy said, you're Unluck, you could help me die," and all that sort of stuff. And I really like, since the Undead Unluck anime has come out, how it seems like Tezuka has taken that and put it into Andy's work, because of course in the anime, whenever Andy regenerates using undead, all of his blood sort of spirals around him, and we can sort of see that happening right now in this first panel here, right? Well, pretty much we just see a few panels of, like, whenever Fuko first met Andy, and she's just like, hey, I'm sure that Andy thinks that was the moment where it all started on that bridge, but that's not true. The truth is, and we don't get that as we get a bunch of action shots going on between Ruin and Andy fighting each other, right? And pretty much Ruin is like, oh no, what's going on here, right? He just completely destroyed that big attack. I think it was called the Blood Clot Ball. And he's like, he completely destroyed it, like, this is bullshit, like, what the fuck? And as he's going through all of this, we see a bunch of Andy clones sort of appear around him. And as all of this is going on, Blood, who is the small Uma that Ruin has with him, sort of like Andy's clothing, right? Sort of like their extra Yuma that they just carry around. We see that Blood's like, hey, well, it seems like with all of these clones, the one with the most mass is actually the real one, right? And Ruin's like, okay, and he's like, all right, let me go stab that one, and he ends up stabbing that one straight through the head, as all of a sudden from the background, we see another Andy sort of flying towards him, but this actually isn't Andy. It is Andy's skin that Fuko has been hiding behind, as she uses a bad bullet undead skin on top of Ruin. And Ruin's like, damn it, so that was her plan. He's like, but there wasn't much contact time that she must have had with that thing, with the skin of undead, so, like, what's going on now, right? And I love from behind, and he's like, hey, it doesn't matter, it's still Unluck. So he's like, and now my ultra hit attack won't miss, right? As we see that he uses a dead road onto Ruin, and Ruin is like, I see, by imbuing Unluck, you ensure that your special attack doesn't miss. But he's like, but that isn't enough to kill me. And he's like, do you guys really think that that will beat God? Like, you guys are super naive here, right? And he pretty much just, like, talks down to Andy, saying, like, hey, you have the same ability as me, so why are you on their side? Like, I'm sure you understand, so just accept it. Like, come to the side of God. Really cool little speech by Ruin. But then Andy just says, like, hey, no, I live by my own rule. And we sort of see that Andy lands on the ground with Fuko behind him, and he just says, hey, and no matter what happens, that rule will never fade, even if it's up against God. As all of a sudden, we see that Ruin gets pretty much rammed into by a truck on the ground, right? And he's like, damn it, another struck of Unluck? Like, what kind of was it? When should she touch me, right? And as all this happens, Fuko looks up, and we see that all of Ruin's body parts are sort of like exploding out of him, sort of like Buggy's chop fruit in a way, but not willingly, by being hit by a truck, I guess. But we see all of his body parts are sort of spreading out, and Fuko's like, no, what did you just do? If you split up his body without a plan, like, he'll start regenerating from all of his limbs, right? And Ruin starts to think that, but as he does, all of a sudden, a bunch of the undead capture pods fall from the sky and contain all of Ruin's different appendages around, right? And Ruin's like, damn it, my warp paths to all of the other things have been sealed off. Like, damn it, a third party must have intervened, right? And we pretty much see that Nico suddenly walks out of a car and he's like, hey, all thanks to me, as pretty much we see that Nico's here now and he was the perpetrator of all of these balls, right? And he's like, hey, thanks to you, I'm as happy as I can be, Andy. As Andy's like, hey, what are you talking about, Nico? It's all up from here, right? Which is a pretty cool moment seeing Nico actually interact with Andy in this loop. Really awesome, right? But as they say this, Andy's like, but hey, we're only just getting started. And he turns over to Fuko and just says like, hey, all of the ties you've worked for over from the past 200 years will come to help us. As we now see Void Volk's good old Unavoidable is here in that massive Unavoidable armor. And he comes through and he just completely punches Ruin's torso up into the sky. And everybody's like, Void, oh, look at that, it's awesome, right? And I really like how Andy's like, man, that really takes me back seeing that, right? As all of a sudden, from another point, we see that Shin and Mui are also here. So they're like, hey, we're here as well. And they used the Journey to the West staff. I forget what it's called in the Undead Unluck universe. It's really going to piss me off if I can't remember what it is, but it doesn't really matter for the context of this video. As he goes and extends the rod up, both Shin and Mui do it, as they pretty much shoot Unruin all the way up into the sky, almost like what they did back in the day with Spoil. Yeah, it was Spoil during that whole arc of Longing Texas and all, or Longing Nevada and all of that, right? And seeing this, Andy's like, oh, look at that, Shin and Mui are already an item too. He's like, that's awesome. And as all this happens, Fuko just is like, hey, thank you, Andy, for always living and never giving up, right? And she's like, it really all started with you, Andy. If you were never born, then I... And all of a sudden, Andy's like, hey, it was just dumb luck, wasn't it? As he does this, he bites off his finger and then drops his finger into Fuko's hand, right? Or his, like, the end of his finger there, right? And he's like, you're the one who turned that luck into fate. As we cut back up to where Ruin is, he's blasting off into the sky, up into space, right? And all of a sudden, Andy suddenly reforms out of his body, right? As Ruin's like, damn it, like he was in my body, that's how he's been able to regenerate up here, right? But as Andy's up here in space, he just says like, hey, thanks to you, Fuko, I have a rule within me now. And he sort of just goes in a little bit of a speech saying like, hey, too bad we can't hear each other up here in space. And he's like, I told you, didn't I? I've got one rule and one rule only. I'm guessing that you found that in God, but I got mine from her. That's why I can live. That's why I can take on any challenge. He's like, now come on, you follow it too. As we suddenly move the page over to a 2-page spread of all of these moments that Andy and Fuko have shared together over the course of this series. We see the first time they met whenever Fuko summoned that big meteorite for Andy in that building there in Japan, and whenever he sort of had the sword sticking out through his chest and all of that. We see whenever Fuko and Andy fought against Gina in the first loop. We see whenever they took down Spring with the help of Lotlo, Rip, and Bunny. And we also see whenever they took down Autumn. No, we see when they took down Autumn, and then we see when they took down Spring with the help of Rip and Lotla too. And then we finally see this final little page, which, if I'm not mistaken, is whenever Andy was going on his own solo thing after pretty much the Union had been dismantled after Revolution started. I don't necessarily know where this last panel's from, but I think that is where it is from. But it's definitely been a while since I read that part of Undead Unluck. I've only read it once in comparison to the rest of these scenes, which I've read multiple times at this point, right? But Andy just continues saying like, hey, let's enjoy what life has to offer, as he comes through and it looks like he's getting ready to deal a fatal blow to Ruin possibly. And I love we see that Andy has this giant smile on his face, and we also see that Clothy's face is right there too on his collar. This is an awesome chapter of Undead Unluck. I'm really happy to see Andy back. Of course, I love our dual protagonists of Andy and Fuko, but seeing the two of them be able to work together and just interact more is really awesome, and I hope as soon as Andy beats Ruin here, we get like a whole chapter just between Andy and Fuko, because that'll just be really incredibly nice to see, because I just love the dichotomies of these two characters. Awesome to see. So with Undead Unluck out of the way there, next we're going to go over to Jujutsu Kaisen, chapter number 268. I think this is the first time I've actually talked about Jujutsu Kaisen on the channel here, because I think I caught up to Jujutsu Kaisen right at the end of when I was doing those last chapter reviews last year, because let me check. Here on my spreadsheet, it looks like I added Jujutsu Kaisen and at the very end of October of 2023 to my spread list, so that's whenever I got caught up with it there. So, and I think I stopped recording those videos. It must have just been before Jujutsu Kaisen got added, because I think it had to be, because what, if we're at the beginning of September now, that'd be issue 40, 1, 2, 3, 4. It was at the beginning of September, or beginning of October, whenever issue 45 would have come out last year, which means I was a little bit away from talking about Jujutsu Kaisen last time, but I talk about Jujutsu Kaisen now, and I mean, if I do these videos, you guys get to hear my thoughts on Jujutsu Kaisen 4 times before this series is over, so look at that, right? But this chapter is titled chapter number 268, Settling Matters. And we start off with Sukuna and Megumi sort of talking to each other in their sort of combined inner world. Pretty much just to sum this up really quickly, Sukuna's pretty much talking down to Megumi, just saying like, hey, how you ever be able to face the world again? You had your body stolen by me, and your sister was killed, and you also refused help from your friends. And oh right, the boy you saved slaughtered lots of people, sort of saying like, hey, it is also, I guess, indirectly Megumi's fault that Sukuna was able to take over Yuji's body and kill everybody during the Shibuya incident, I guess. That's sort of what I'm taking from this. My computer just crapped out on me. Let me reload the page real fast. I don't want to go into full screen. I just want to go into, yeah, okay, here we go. My bad. But pretty much we see that Sukuna's just like, hey, just give up Megumi, like you'll never be able to live a normal life, so stay quiet and let me handle all of these things. And then Megumi just starts talking to Sukuna back, saying like, hey, why are you so desperate about all of this? Like, one of Sukuna's fingers is still out there, and the way to become a cursed object is to set Itadori, and pulls Miyabi, you die. Plus resonance isn't good for you. Pretty much he's just talking down into Sukuna, as we see that Sukuna is turning into like a blob inside of Megumi all of a sudden. As we cut back to the present, where Yuji had just gone through, and after Nobara used her resonance, after coming back last chapter on Sukuna, Yuji comes through and just punches the crap out of Sukuna after that. And we see as Sukuna starts to fly back, we see that he suddenly turns back into Megumi, giving Megumi his body back. The other two arms sort of fly out of his sides, and as all of this happens, we see that Sukuna sort of is on the outside of Megumi, and sort of starts fading away and shriveling up as Megumi is now laying in his normal body on the ground. And we see that Sukuna is laying here on the ground as Yuji, who is still up, sort of walks over to him and just says like, hey, so what's it going to be, Sukuna, right? And we pretty much just remember what Yuji said a few chapters ago in his whole domain area, pretty much saying like, hey, free Fushiguro and I'll spare you if you return to me, right? And Yuji just says like, hey, Sukuna, you are me, as he reaches his hands down and pulls up the small remnants of Sukuna on the ground. And Yuji just continues saying like, hey, we were born within the burden of a curse, and the monster you became was up to because of luck. I mean, I had my grandfather, and he's like, Sukuna, let's do it again. Not to curse someone, but to live with someone. Even if no one else accepts it, I'm willing to go on living with you. And Sukuna just says like, hey, I've got to compliment how you are complete in acting to fool Yuji Itadori, but do not dare insult me, for I am a curse. As we see that Sukuna just fades away in Yuji's hands. At this point, we cut over to Hikari and Urahime, I think it is the ice girl's name. Urahime? Utahime. No, let me type in ice girl, JJK, Urame. I knew it started with a W, but, or not a W, a U. We pretty much see that Urame and, Akari are here, right? And we pretty much can tell that during their fight, Urame just is like, hey, it's all over. Akari's like, yeah, it definitely looks that way. And he's like, so what are we going to do now, right? And Urame's just like, hey, we're going to do nothing. I mean, it's the end. If Sukuna lost, it's because he was a fully fleshed curse, and it isn't because you guys were strong at all, right? And she just says, like, hey, you merely got lucky. Being born 1,000 years later saved all of your asses, right? And Hikari's like, I merely got lucky? Like, that's the ultimate praise for a guy like me. I love Hikari's, like, I'm lucky act. It's so cool. I love seeing, like, the dichotomy of luck between, like, this and Undead Unluck, where, I don't know, it's just a little bit of an interesting observation, right? And we pretty much see that, Urame is just like, hey, like, that's pretty funny. As we see that it seems like ice is starting to crack around her, and from what it looks like the ice around her neck cracks. And from what I can tell, it looks like all of the other ice on the battlefield here starts to move up into the sky, as I guess that this is just the end of that fight. Like, I guess, Urame's just dead after this, so... A little interesting, not the way I thought it was going to go. I was hoping we'd at least see, like, a little bit more of this fight, but it really is what it is, so I guess that's the end of Urame. Sure. But at this point, we cut to, where Megumi is laying in bed, and we see that he wakes up. He's got some cool scars on his face. It seems like these scars are where, Sukuna's eyes sort of used to be, or like those extra eyes, like on the mask, where those were on his face. And we see that he's got some scars there. And he wakes up and looks out over in front of him, and he sees that, both Yuji and Nobara are there, right? And he's like, what are you two doing? And the two of them are like, oh, hey, we were planning a Kunisaki's Alive surprise. And Megumi's like, oh, I'm sorry to ruin your fun, but, yeah, as we do this, we sort of see that the three of them move outside to sit at sort of a coffee table. And Nobara's like, hey, the hottest girl in class you thought was dead is now alive, so shouldn't you guys, like, piss yourself in joy or something, right? And Yuji's like, yeah, well, I did cry a bit. And Megumi's like, yeah, I found out about that while I was in the body of Sukuna and all of that. And she's just like, yeah, I guess I sort of did need to be there, didn't I, right? And as they all sort of just, like, talk some more amongst themselves, like, Yuji's like, hey, shall we just, like, sit down and get to it? And he's like, Ieri really received these letters from Gojo before he sort of passed on, and now that we're all together, we can open them as a group, right? And Megumi's just like, letters? And Nobara's just like, yeah, that doesn't really seem like a Gojo move, like sort of imagining him writing those sort of, like, just creeps me out, right? And I love how Yuji's like, that's really mean, right? But he's like, hey, there are only two, and he's like, I actually don't have one myself. And Yuji just says, like, and that's because I was actually able to talk to Gojo directly. As he sort of just thinks about that, because of course, Megumi was inside Sukuna's body, and Nobara was perceived to be dead at the point, right? So it's very nice that Yuji sort of was able to have that final moment with Gojo that these other two characters weren't able to have, right? And Megumi's like, oh, so you did, didn't you? As all of a sudden, Nobara's like, let's do this. She opens up her letter, and she just starts to read it. And both of Yuji and Megumi are like, all right, so what did he actually write, right? And Nobara just says, like, just info on where my mom is and what she's doing. And they're like, so did you want to know that? And she's like, no, I don't want to know that at all, right? And she's like, I shouldn't be surprised that he was able to find her. Like, I mean, he was Gojo Sensei after all. And we see that Megumi opens up his letter, and he just starts to, like, laugh out loud, right? And Nobara's like, why are you laughing? Did he make you, like, special grade or something? Like, what's going on here? And he just continues to laugh, and both Nobara and Yuji are just like, look at that, Fushiguro's actually laughing, like, you gotta show me what's in that letter, like, what is so funny, right? And Megumi just says, like, hey, it's actually a lot like Kunisaki's letter, right? And both Nobara and Yuji get their hands on it, and they read it, and they're like, that's kind of harsh. Like, were you actually laughing at this? And Megumi just starts to smile some more. He's like, hey guys, it's okay. And we eventually see what his letter says. And his letter just simply reads from Gojo, like, hey, sorry Megumi, but your dad's a goner. I completely wasted his ass. And we sort of just see Gojo's little illustration in the corner. He's like, hey, my bad. And that's all there is to Megumi's letter here. And It's such a nice, small little moment. We haven't seen Megumi for so long in this series. Well, I'm not the biggest Jujutsu Kaisen fan. My favorite character in the series has got to be Toji, just for that cool level of badassery that he puts off. And just this letter from Gojo, like, he talked to Yuji about his life. He talked to Nobara about reconnecting with her family. But then just to give the letter to Megumi, just saying like, hey, I'm sorry, but your dad's a goner. I wasted his ass. It's just so funny. It's just a great moment through and through, right? But at this point, we suddenly sort of cut scenes as all of a sudden we hear like a clock tick in the background, and Nobara's like, "Oh crap! Hey, I gotta go see Maki and the others, and like come with us, Fushiguro." And Megumi's like, "What are you talking about?" And Yuji's like, "Hey, everybody's gotta do this together." And Megumi's like, "Yeah, I guess I should apologize to everybody and say thanks." But Nobara's like, "No, this isn't about that." And Megumi's like, "What are you talking about?" And Yuji just says like, "Hey, it's about Yuta Senpai, right?" And he's like, "We have to save him." As we see the entire team is sort of walking through the building, as we just hear some people yell like, "Yuta, you jerk!" And we pretty much just see that Megumi's like, "Oh, we have to save him from them, eh?" As we sort of just get a little bit of an image of all of the characters who seem to still be alive here. We see that Maki's of course alive. The cursed speech user, who I cannot remember his name right now, is still alive. Panda's still alive. Miwa's alive. The broom girl is still alive. And then, what is his name? The scaredy cat grade A sorcerer guy who used a sword. He's also still alive. I don't read Kusakabe. Yeah, his name's Kusakabe. He's also alive, so this sort of end of chapter, sort of like one of those nebulous ends, but being that we have 3 chapters of JJK left after this, it sort of is what it is. But I feel like I spent a little bit too long on that chapter, but this chapter will be really quick, as it is Kagurabachi chapter number 47. I didn't mention this earlier, but Kagurabachi actually had the front of the magazine this week due to it being Kagurabachi's first anniversary and all of these celebrations going on with it. But if you want to hear more about that, I have now recently started a series of Kagurabachi chapter reviews on the channel, so you can hear my in-thought discussion on Kagurabachi if you go over and check out those videos. I'll have that playlist linked down in the description down below. But to quickly go through this chapter, it is the beginning of the Sword Bear assassination arc. We get a little bit of information on Yoji Uruha, who is the user of the cursed blade, or enchanted blade, Kumeyori. We pretty much see that he has a established relationship with Kunishige and really looked up to him. We pretty much just see that whenever shit went down, he ended up running, and he ran to a train station. In this train station, he meets up with Hikari, and Hikari eventually sort of gives him a sword here, and as a bunch of the Hishaku sorcerers come over to start attacking them, Uruha pretty much starts using his sword skills and does a lot of really cool movements and cuts down all of these people. Eventually more Hishaku sorcerers show up, so Hikari decides to grab Uruha, and they hop onto a train, and as they hop onto a train, there's a bunch of sorcerers in there too. But not unsurprisingly, Chihiro's on the train, and he comes through and cuts down those sorcerers and meets up with Uruha and Hikari. And at this point, Uruha recognizes Chihiro as Kunishige's son, and he's like, "Hey, can I fight by your side again? Like, hey, Mr. Rokuhira." And Chihiro has this really awesome deadpan stare at Uruha. I know this was a little quick, but these videos do get very long, and go check out my actual video on Kagurabachi if you want to hear about all of this amazing stuff that has recently been going on with the series, and just hear me talk about chapter 47 in more depth, right? With that, we're going to move on to Ruri Dragon chapter number 20. This chapter is titled That Isn't Very Nice. We actually get a color page for Ruri Dragon this week, and I know that Ruri Dragon isn't actually published inside of Weekly Shonen Jump anymore. It is on the V-Jump website. It's also not part of Jump Plus, which is why I still sort of keep it on this roster here. And most importantly, the Weekly Shonen Jump wiki account, whenever they talk about all of the series that ran in Jump every week, they always list that Ruri Dragon is a series that runs online. So that's good enough an excuse for me to say that it's still part of Weekly Shonen Jump and not part of like Jump Plus or whatever. So I still talk about it whenever I still read it and include it into rankings every week. Pretty much to go through at the end of last chapter, some girls were making fun of Ruri's horns, and we pretty much see that Ruri is spacing out all day because of that, and we see that Maeda sort of takes note of this, and as sort of just seeing that Ruri's been acting all down in the dumps like this. Ruri sits outside of all of her friends, and they pretty much just tell her, like, hey, feel better, Ruri, and everything. They're like, hey, you gotta realize some people aren't going to like you simply because you are a demi-human, and there's nothing that you can really do massively about that. I mean, it sucks, but it sort of is what it is. And as they go through talking about all of that, we see that there's eventually a committee meeting today for the Sports Fest stuff, and we pretty much see that the two leaders are like, hey, today we're going to be making signboards for the club. We see that everybody's sort of working on those, and we see that the two girls who were sort of bullying Ruri earlier in the day are also there. And we see that while Ruri is working on her signboard, we see that these two girls are sitting there in front of her doing it, and as Ruri sort of just moves around to get some stuff, one of these girls is like, hey, could you not, like, point those horns at us? And Ruri's like, oh my gosh, like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, right? And the other girl's like, yeah, watch yourself, okay? Those things are, like, super dangerous. And he's like, actually, maybe just, like, get lost. I'm sure there's an empty corner somewhere for you, right? And Ruri's like, oh, yeah, sure, I'm sorry. As all of a sudden, Maeda walks over to where Ruri and these two girls are. And she's like, hey, that isn't very nice, is it? As she sort of goes around Ruri's shoulder and then, like, puts a finger on top of Ruri's horn. And Ruri, sort of, like, shocked by this, jumps back. He's like, oh, my bad, right? And Maeda's like, hey, did you two girls see that over there talking to those two bullies? And she's just like, and two of them like, huh? Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, it's funny, right? Like, listen, I'm in a Koi's class, all right? And she acts like that whenever someone comes near her. And she's always focused on making sure her horns aren't pointed at someone whenever they get close, right? And one of the bullies is just like, hey, what's your point here? And Maeda's just like, hey, I'm not trying to get, like, anything across, like, super crazy or anything. I'm just trying to say, like, it's pretty rude to, like, shun someone without giving them a chance, especially when you don't know what they're going through, right? And eventually the two bullies sort of just, like, get up and be like, all right, screw you, we'll be moving on then. And they sort of get up and move to another area of the classroom, right? And as all of this happens, Ruri's just like, that's very kind and rich coming from you, Maeda, right? And she's like, yeah, like, I knew as soon as some of those words came out of my mouth, but Ruri's like, hey, so thank you for doing that, right? And Maeda's just like, hey, I saw what happened this morning. It looked like they were bad-mouthing you in front of everybody. And she's like, hey, and I understand you get sad whenever they say that crap, right? And she's like, do you know why they're doing that? And Ruri's like, not particularly. And she's like, well, I sort of figured. And she sort of just tells Ruri that, hey, you are an easy target to them, right? And he says, that's true for anybody who stands out, even regular people who are a bit weird. They're easy targets. And she says, and more so if you, because you are something beyond human. You're a demi-human, right? And Ruri's like, oh man, you make me sound a little cool here, right? But either way, she's just like, hey, that reasoning still sucks. And Ruri's like, yeah, it's very nasty of him to say that. But Maeda just says like, hey, but I really don't think it's about the horns. And she's like, you didn't do anything wrong to those girls. They were just being bullies to be bullies, right? And she said, that kind of petty gossip is just how they communicate. Like, don't take any excuse to do it. And she says, they'll latch on to any topic. It doesn't matter what. The gossip itself makes them feel closer. And she just says like, hey, here, a girl they already didn't care for just happened to grow horns. So of course they're like, yeah, we'll make fun of her and we'll do all of that, right? And she says, it really doesn't go any deeper than that, Akoi. And she's like, so just don't take it to heart whatever you do, right? And Ruri sort of just smiles after hearing this. And she just says like, what happened? Who is this sweetheart? And what did they do with Maeda? Like, did an alien come over, like, take over the body, right? And Maeda's like, god damn it, she's like, bite me or something like that. Pretty funny joke right there. But Maeda just says like, hey, look, you said we should all get along with each other, so I'm trying to do my best and getting along with you, Akoi, right? And Ruri's just like, hey, what do you think I should do? And Maeda's like, hey, it's not my problem. And she's like, I guess you could get in their faces like what you did with me. I mean, you are a pro at butting into other people's problems. Great line. And Ruri's like, no. Taking on a pair is way scarier than just taking it like one-on-one, right? And Maeda's just like, hey, whatever. And she eventually, like, just says a little thing like, hey, honestly, I'm a little glad you came to me like that, right? And all of a sudden, Maeda sort of just turns around and just says, like, hey, I've suddenly got, like, a wild idea. Like, hear me out, okay? And Ruri's like, okay. And Maeda just says, like, hey, it's time we strike back. And she sort of puts up her finger in front of her face. And there's a little bit of a speech bubble here just saying, like, hey, man, Maeda, you're really looking like a villain, right? But we see it's the next morning, those girls are gossiping, and they are walking to, of course, class where both Ruri and Maeda are. And as they walk into the classroom, they hear a bunch of screaming and they hear a bunch of yelling. As they walk into the classroom, and they see Maeda on the ground with a koi right next to her, and we see that Maeda has a pair of pliers on Ruri's horn, right? And Maeda's like, hey, come on, just sit still, it's dangerous if you keep squirming around like this, right? And Ruri's like, hey, it really hurts, like, I'm not kidding, like, what's going on here? And Maeda's like, relax, there's no way you got nerves in those horns, like, besides, you agreed to this, so quit being a baby about it, right? And Ruri's like, no, I can't, like, this is way too much, right? And these two bullies walk in, and they're like, what in the world, like, what the heck is she doing right there, right? And as they walk in, and our guy just is like, hey, Maeda just suddenly started yelling about breaking the horns on Ruri's head, right? And the two girls are like, huh, like, what are you talking about, right? And we pretty much see, like, they're just talking back and forth, and all of a sudden, Ruri's there, and she's trying to push Maeda off of her head. Suddenly, one of her horns snaps off and falls to the ground, as there's a gasp that's heard all the way throughout the entire room, as we get this image of Ruri's head, where one of her horns is still there, but the other one has now been broken off. And we see that Maeda is sitting there, and she's just looking over at a koi, and she's got this sort of shocked expression on her face. And she says, like, I never thought I never thought your horn would break that easy, like, so much for some mighty dragon horns. And she eventually just says, like, hey, and now old Lefty, like, it's gotta go too. And we sort of cut back to that flashback from earlier in the channel, or early in that chapter, whenever we saw that, Maeda had a plan, and, Maeda just says, like, hey, I've got no love for those other two girls either, okay? And she's like, so I'm thinking we make them suffer a little bit, right? And Ruri's like, hey, hang on, I'm not into, like, serving any type of revenge or anything, like, what are you planning on doing? And Maeda just says, like, hey, don't think about it that way. Anyhow, do you think those horns can break off? And that is where we end this chapter of Ruri Dragon. This is a really good chapter, in my opinion. I really like the moment between Maeda and Ruri. It's definitely one of my favorite interactions that we end up getting in this series, and I really just am interested in knowing what Maeda's plan is, because I take it she's not doing this from a malicious intent, but she's making it look that way. But I'm just very interested to see where this goes in the future, and as of right now, I honestly have no clue whatsoever. But we're going to have to wait, like, I think 3 weeks to get our Ruri Dragon chapter, which is a little disappointing. But as long as the author, who is, I forget their name currently, Masaoki Shindo, as long as they can keep up in good health, I'm 100% fine with it, right? Next up is Kill Blue Chapter 67. I want to blaze through this chapter because I don't think it was particularly good. Pretty much those two other unicorn students who are now been introduced into school and who have challenged Nor into a Mitsuoka challenge, they're sort of standing there. They have a brief talk with Otogami, and Otogami's just like, hey, you guys know what the principal's plan is? And he's like, hey, whatever, like, we'll do a challenge here. The other two guys leave, and before they leave, they pretty much say there'll be a mounted battle in which they will be fighting off against each other. And everybody's like, a mounted battle, like on sports day, whenever, best example of this I can think of is in My Hero Academia, the cavalry battle. It was pretty much the same exact thing there, as you have a student on top and other students who hold him up. You have like 3 people on the bottom and 1 on top, and the person on top has to collect headbands from other people. Really simple as that. But no, it's an actual like cavalry battle on horses, like mounted infantry and like jousting and that sort of thing. Sort of what it is. We see the group makes a whole bunch of tea and then drinks it and then talks about everything. We now get the idea that Shin is going to be the double partner for Otogami in this upcoming match. You know what? Last week, like I said, I filmed that other video about well, I didn't write, I filmed like my thoughts. I'm like, hey, this is what I thought about this issue of Jump. And I specifically talked there in that little snippet there, like, hey, if next week, if I would really like to see either the Justice guy, or I forget what the Justice guy's name is, Rindo or something. No, not Rindo. Whatever Justice guy's name was. I'd like to see him and Otagami maybe team up for this battle. And I literally said, like, if Shin is the one who ends up helping Otagami with this battle, I will lose complete interest in this arc. And because Shin is helping Otagami, I have now lost complete interest in this arc. I mean, it's just sort of true. And the end of the chapter, Otagami just says, like, all right, Shin, me and you will be partners in doing this whole thing with helping them with the battle. The rest of the home ec club's like, all right, we're not going to get involved with everything going on here. And the end of the chapter, we're introduced into the Unicorn Elite class rep, Kaito Hazakura. I didn't care for this chapter of Kill Blue. Kill Blue is like a really hit or miss thing. Like, I think it can be really awesome some weeks whenever it focuses on more of like the actual Hitman stuff, and whenever like Otagami's acting cool or on his own, or acting with Justice Guy or Tenma-Tendo. But like, I don't care about Shin. I don't care about any of these new characters, and yeah, there's just not a whole lot to this chapter, and I didn't really enjoy it. And that's really all there is for Kill Blue here. Next up is Kyokuto Necromance, chapter number 18. This is the final chapter of this series, and hey, I got to talk about it for one chapter. This was the newest work by Fusai Naba, the same person who wrote Aliens Area a few years ago, and just sort of give my thoughts on this series since I haven't talked about it in a video. I really enjoyed this series for a good part of it, and I really liked what they did in like chapters 8, 9, and 10 of the series. But since we pretty much moved on and got like messing with Rio and everything, it sort of got whole lot less interesting. And because this is the final chapter of the series, and I don't feel like talking about almost all of it, because there's a bunch of really random stuff here, and you can definitely tell that the series got axed with the way all of the movements suddenly happen. There's just not a whole lot to say about it. I mean, just sort of to go through it, of course, in the last chapter, Kyoru got revived from pretty much killing himself using Shishishi's ring, and we see that, like, at the end of the last chapter, he saw that sorcerer spirit-looking thing, and this chapter he's like, hey, what was that? Like, that necromancer very much looked like Shatari, and, like, and then Shishishi talked to me, and, like, what was he trying to warn me about? And he's like, all right, let me try giving Mr. Mezu a call. He tries to give him a call, but he can't reach him. We pretty much see that the reason he couldn't reach him is because Mr. Meiji has been trying to contact Yoji, who is apparently still alive. And at the end of the chapter, we'll see that, yes, indeed, Yoji is alive. We pretty much see that Mr. Meiji is here with the other girl who was sort of like a focal point during that last arc, like the girl who's sort of just around to be around. Pretty much, she just reminds Mezu, like, hey, the target we're tracking is on the move around here. Mezu's like, oh, okay. He's like, sorry, I got distracted. They see all of these other sorcerers who have all of these spirits behind them. I forget what the spirits are even called in this series at this point. Shiryo. All the Shiryo are behind them, moving around. And eventually, Meiji's like, hey, it looks like those are some of the spellcasters who made the special rings that people use to keep spirits in. Like, hey, they probably came to Japan to go after Koru. The girl's just like, hey, what do you mean by that? And eventually, these sorcerers walk over to where Meiji is, or these necromancers, whatever they're called. It doesn't really matter. I mean, this is the final chapter. They talk over and pretty much just say, like, hey, our leader has already made contact with Kaoru Uno, so it doesn't really matter if you continue to trail us, so just sort of letting you know about that and, like, good day. We see that Kaoru finally gets through to Mr. Mezu, and as he goes over to pull up the phone and he starts to talk to him, the signal cuts as he walks inside of his house, and he's like, why did the signal drop? Like, what in the world? As all of a sudden he walks into his house, and the chief of this group is standing right there in his house. And she just says, hey, it was me. I dropped the signal. And Kaoru's just like, what in the world? And he sees this lady, and he's just like, what's going on here? Like, why is she here? How did she know my house? And he remembers Shishishi message last time of just saying, like, hey, run. And he says, like, run? Where am I supposed to run to? Like, what's going on? And the spirit just says, like, hey, don't worry, I mean you no harm. And Korra's like, no, wait, I can't, like, believe her. Like, I need to get out of here, right? And she just says, like, hey, the creator of Shishichi and Chitari's rings is me. I did it to protect you from Shiryo. As we see it, this lady just sort of runs over to Korra and just says, like, hey, our homeland was once invaded. In revenge, my brethren spread Shiryo all around the world, including this island nation in the Far East. But I was opposed to it. I said I wanted him to spare this little Far East nation, and Korra's like, why would you want to do that? As we see that this lady sort of flashes back and sees a older Japanese man in a uniform of some kind, and she sort of reaches out her hands towards Korra and hugs him. And Korra's like, what in the world's going on here? And this lady just says, hey, it's because I loved him. Shigeru Uno, your great-great-grandpa. And as she says this, Kaoru looks behind her where she's hugging him and see his grandma slumped over in her chair in the house. And he runs over to her, and as he's sort of doing this, the lady just says, like, hey, I'm sorry, I can't forgive any woman tied to an Uno man. And hearing this, Kaoru sort of reacts, and suddenly some necromancy power comes out of his ring as he suddenly summons Shishishi behind him. And he's like, hey, what did you do to Grandma? And the lady's just like, hey, wait, look, like, don't fly into a panic, like, I can still give her soul back to you, but only if you become my husband. And she's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I actually said it. And Korra's like, huh? What are you talking about? And this lady, who don't even get her name, sort of just holds her arms out and sort of goes in to try to give Korra another hug. And we just get the chapter title, final chapter, Far East Necromance. And we pretty much see for the final few pages of this chapter, we see that somebody gets a call on the beach, and it's none other than Yoji, who has finally been contacted by Mr. Meiji, right? And Meiji's like, hey, you finally picked up, like, what have you even been doing this entire time? Like, hey, damn it, can you even hear me, Yoji? And Yoji's like, hey, I was just fishing out here. And Meiji's like, what are you fucking talking about? Like, you actually fish? And she's like, well, no, or he's like, no, this is actually my first time, like, I actually can't fish at all. And Meiji's like, well, if you can't fish, and why are you even doing it, damn it, right? And eventually, Yoji's like, hey, is this about a job? And he's like, yeah, it sure is. And Yoji's like, how very melancholy. And we see that Meiji's like, oh, damn it, you just wanted to use that word, didn't you? And the final lines of this series is just Yoji saying, why, yes, I sure did. And that is where we end off the series here of Kyokuto Necromance. I really enjoyed some early parts of this series, but I definitely feel that you could tell the series was getting canceled from a while ago. And as it comes, whenever a Shonen Jump series gets canceled, it's really hard to sort of sit here and continue to care about it as this time goes on. The whole sort of interesting thing of like, hey, the Far East Necro romance is a little bit of an interesting thing. Sort of just getting that idea of like, oh, hey, Far East being Japan, and like, it wasn't necromancy, it was a undead romance this entire time. A little interesting, and I wish we sort of knew more about this character who sort of looks like Chitari and all this other stuff, but being that we weren't able to, it sort of is what it is. This series only has 18 chapters out of it, which means that if volume 1, which sold like dog shit, was 7 chapters, that means you only have 11 chapters to split up into 2 more volumes. So I'm guessing what's going to happen, like what happened with Hunter's Guild Red Hood, is it's going to be like split up to where 5 and 6 of those chapters will be per volume, and then there'll be like the original one shot for the series and a bunch of other information that will maybe flesh out the ending of this chapter. So is what it is. I really hope that next time Fusai Naba is able to come through, that we get a really awesome series from him. And yeah, that's really all there is for the Kyokuto Necromance there. Next up is Hima-Ten. This is chapter number 8 of the series. And I don't really want to skip through it, but I am just going to go through this chapter relatively fast. Of course, Kaoru is not Kaoru. What am I talking about? Iamori is going on a date with Kanai. We actually start off with a color page in this chapter where we get sort of some colors for both Hima, or I honestly forget her name. I haven't talked about this series, so I don't quite remember all of the names. With Hima, and then of course with Kanai here. This chapter is pretty much all about Kanai and Iamori going on a date. Sort of date, not really. I mean, it's sort of what it is. The two of them are sort of just going back and forth, sort of hanging out and just like doing a whole bunch of little cute things. One of my favorite moments of the chapter is whenever Kanai is sort of talking to Iamori, and she's just like, "Man, you're so tall, Iamori, right?" And they hop on an escalator, and then Kanai gets on it first, and she says like, "Oh, look at this, Iamori, I'm taller than you are right now." It's just a little really cute moment as this happens, and Iamori's like, "Hey, it's just the escalator, right?" But Kanai's like, "Hey, it doesn't matter, I'm still taller if it's even just for this second, right?" Pretty much we just see that Iamori is just really enjoying this day. He's like, is it even legal to have this much fun on a day off like this? And he's like, and also, like, I get to see Kanai out of her uniform for the first time. Like, she looks so feminine, she looks so cute to me, right? And the two of them are sort of just doing all this, quote, really fun stuff. Throughout this entire chapter, there's sort of like an underlying moment to where, who's her face, Kanai just keeps talking about, Hamari, that's her name. Just, like, keeps talking about Hamari, just in, like, man, Hamari's, like, so cool. I'm sure she'd fit in with all these really trendy people out and about, right? She's like, hey, she's so cool, and, Iamori's like, yeah, she really is really cool, but he sort of thinks like, but even though I can't say it out loud, to me, nobody is as cute as Kanai. As we see they go into a coffee shop, they have a little fun doing all of that sort of stuff. Iamori tells Kanai about what he does for his job, of course, being a house cleaner, and she really praises him about it, and she's like, man, I can totally see with like that kind of work, definitely seems like it would suit you. And they eventually get talking about lunch, and the fact that Hamari always makes her lunches gets brought up. Of course, we know it's a lie, because we know that Iamori actually makes those lunches. A little bit of a cute moment as Iamori is just like, man, I'm on cloud 9 because she's actually praising my lunch, even though she doesn't know it. It's a little bit of a nice thing. And of course, they were going to a comedy show during all of this, so they eventually end up at the comedy show. And we see that Kanai is laughing at all of these jokes that people have been telling. And Iamori's just like really happy, and he's almost paying more attention to Kanai while in her reactions instead of all of the jokes that these people are saying, right? And there's this really, really funny joke that we get here as Iamori's like, hey, I'm so interested in seeing how Kanai reacts and focusing on the show. As we see the two comedians are on stage and just like, hey ma'am, make sure to look around before you throw all of that water around, right? And he's like, hey, just look at my pants. As we see that the guy has got water all over his pants, or like a pee stain in that area. And Iamori's like, damn, like it's so crude. And he goes over and looks at Kanai, who is just like laughing, and like she's just having a great time watching this. And Iamori's like damn it, I'm trying not to laugh like so hard, right? He's like, it's just so funny, and just like I just want to pay attention to her. And eventually the punchline of this joke happens as the lady's just like, hey, I didn't throw water on you. And the guy's like, wait, you didn't? But he's like, oh, that's right, but you did scare me so bad that I peed all over myself. And as this punchline sort of goes through, Kanai just sort of busts out laughing, and she eventually says like, oh man, I'm with Iamori right now, so please stop making me laugh like this. And we just see that Iamori is like blushing so hard, and he's doing all of this stuff. It's a really, really cute scene, really made even better by that extremely phony joke that we get here by these two comedians, right? But as we near the end of the chapter, we eventually see that the two of them are on their way home. They're talking about how much fun this entire day was, and pretty much what ends up happening is, who's his face? Iamori's just like, hey, that was really great, and Kanai's like, well, I guess this is my station entrance. It looks like I need to be getting on my way, right? And Iamori's like, hey, that was really fun. He's like, I'm a little sad it went by all too fast, and eventually they just like give each other those really nice remarks, and like, right, well, I'll see you later at school, alright? And Iamori's like, right, I'll see you later, Kanai. And as they're both walking away, they're thinking to each other like, man, if only I would have asked the other to go out to eat with me right now. It's a little bit of a cute thing. But as Iomori's on the walk back home to his house, he gets a text from Himari about something work-related, right? He opens up his phone and he takes a look at it. And long story short, Himari has been sick. She got some sickness of some kind. So she doesn't need Iomori to come in to clean her house tomorrow because she doesn't want him getting sick. But she does need Iomori to pick up some groceries for her, right? And being that Himari's sick, Iomori's like, hey, are you sure you don't want, like, me to wait till tomorrow? I mean, I'm in your area right now, so I can do it today. And he's like, and if you're alone and need somebody to look after you, then, I mean, I'm probably your best bet, and I can come by, right? And eventually Himari is just like, hey, I think I'd like it if you did that. And she's like, I at least think so, right? And Himari's like, you only think? He's like, whatever, I'll come by and do it. And he eventually just is like, hey, she works too hard for a high school girl, as he sort of just starts running away to go over and help Himari now with all of her stuff and making sure that she's not dying over there. Really, really cute chapter, and one that I really do enjoy. But actually, I just got something that came up that I need to go out and do in the real world, so, yeah, whenever I get back, we've got 6 more series to talk about. We got through just under half of them in however long this recording has been so far. But yeah, I'll be back. It'll be like right next for whatever it is. But I'll see you guys back in a second. All right, well, I am actually back after like a 5-minute break, not like the 5-hour break I actually expected. Apparently the bus I need to catch doesn't come for like another 35 minutes or something, so I've got a bit more time to talk about manga before I actually need to leave. So next up, like I was hinting at earlier, is Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi chapter number 10. This chapter is titled, Let's Go Bowling. And there's an aspect of the old Weekly Shonen Jump series I used to do that I haven't brought into this yet, and that was the Mama Yu speed round, which of course wherever I put up a timer on screen and saw how fast I could talk about a certain manga series and get the chapter over with quickly, so this doesn't take literally forever. So I figured, since Mama Yu is over and that doesn't really exist anymore, how about let's do the Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi speed round instead, seeing how quickly I can talk about this one chapter of Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi and still hit on mostly all of the big important details. So let me grab another sip of water here real fast, let's get the pipes lubricated, and let's speed through this chapter of Ultimate Exorcist Kiyoshi. So we start off the chapter with Kiyoshi and Nihon and Jack Joe sitting on the roof of the school, and Nihon brings up the proposition of, hey, Kiyoshi, let's go bowling today, right? And Kiyoshi's like, man, that sounds so cool. And he pulls out a little notebook out of his pocket. It says like, hey, 10 things I want to do in high school, top secret, no peeking. And he flips it open to page number 53, which is a difficulty A, which it says, visit an entertainment center with friends after school. And bowling counts for this. Suddenly, some other people that Nihon invited to go with them have suddenly appeared. We get one of these guys' names is Tomoda, and the other one is Cheetah. Tomoda is from the soccer team, and Cheetah is from the music club. Seeing these other people that he doesn't know, Kiyoshi sort of just freezes up and loses all of his enthusiasm and goes into his, like, embarrassed mode, right? And as Nihon calls it, his severe shyness has suddenly been triggered. All of a sudden, as all of this happens, they start to talk to each other, and Nihon brings up that Kiyoshi works at the Gates of Hell Chinese restaurant, and both Cheetah and Tomoda are like, oh, that's really, really cool. I was about to say Chihiro. Kiyoshi then offers up his food to the two of these guys, and they end up trying it, and they really enjoy it. And eventually, Kiyoshi comes out of his shell to these guys right here, right? And eventually, they get ready to head back to school, and they decide to use the bathroom before going back to class. And we see that one of Kiyoshi's other objectives is a difficulty B, which is a group piss, as he's like, awesome, I'm so in, and he goes and checks off 2 things off of his school list today, right? They get to the bowling alley, and surprisingly, there are a bunch of girls there, because it looks like this is going to be a competition between 4-on-4 boys and 4-on-4 girls, or sort of they mix up the gender teams here, right? And Kiyoshi's a little freaked out by this, as we see that number 84 on his checklist was difficulty was an SS ranking. It's like, hey, do something with the girls group, as they all go around and talk to each other. Nihon points out that the most popular girl in school is also here, named Maria Satome, and she is in the brass section of the band. Kiyoshi sees this, and he thinks about the other girl who's part of the Exorcist troupe. I don't remember her name because she hasn't really shown up and done much. But Kyoshi's like, hey, I'll try to make a good impression. They start to bowl. Nihon's doing very good, and eventually it is time for Kiyoshi to do it. And as Kyoshi's going to do it, Maria stands up beside him and is like, hey, you can do it, Kiyoshi. And Kiyoshi, being freaked out, just pretty much throws the ball into the gutter and does not make a good shot at all. At this point, he's done this like 5 rounds in a row. He's doing really bad, but we also see that Maria is on their team, and she's like, hey, I'll make up for your score. And we see that she does an incredible score, getting strikes almost every time she plays, right? And Kyoshi's getting like very upset by this, and he almost wants to try to use one of his Exorcist powers to end up doing this, right? Eventually, it is the final frame wrapping up. We see that the score for the other team is 430 points, and for the team that Kyoshi's on, it's 421, and it all comes up to the shot, the bowl that he makes here, right? And like, hey, everything's riding on Kyoshi's final ball here. And as he gets ready to go and bowl, all of a sudden, Maria gets possessed by a demon. And she grabs the bowling ball of Kyoshi's hand, throws it into the thing, and all of a sudden, as this demon runs over towards Kiyoshi and starts to destroy him, Kiyoshi pretty much like taps Maria's head, and the demon comes out. And then Kiyoshi pretty much takes out the bowling ball, sticking his fingers into it, and he pretty much is like, hey, you demon, get ready for a divine strike. As he pretty much rolls the bowling ball, it goes through, cuts this demon completely in half, and he gets a strike, winning his team the game here, right? And everybody's like, oh man, that's so incredible. And at the end of the chapter, Mario comes up and is just like, hey, you're incredible, Kiyoshi, and thanks for saving me back there. And Kiyoshi pretty much passes out, right? In the final note of the chapter, like, hey, and so Kiyoshi Hirai grew a little closer with his classmates. And that's where we end this chapter. How did I go into speed round? Only post-production me will know. This was a good chapter. I did enjoy it, but I really like the sort of thing about bowling here, and as soon as something involves exorcism, Kiyoshi gets really good at it. I find it really funny, but I really hope that Kyoshi's whole thing of like, oh no, girls are scary, I hope that doesn't last forever, because it's going to be a little annoying if that becomes his only character trait throughout this entire series, right? With that, let's move on to Astro Royale, chapter number 19. This chapter is titled Out of the Way. And last time we saw that we were having a little bit of a face-off between Shio and oh no, what's our main character's name? Hibaru. Hibaru was using his Magnum Fist Astro thing to go after Shio, right? And Shio's seeing this is like, oh no, I'm in trouble. And he's like, that pressure, like I have to go all at full force now. And we see that he uses a move called Black Diamond. And pretty much just to sum this up really quickly, what Black Diamond does is we know that his Astro sort of contains all of the rubble around him. And it pretty much brings all of the rubble together and condenses it into this black ball. And as we see this Cross is like, what the heck is that? Like, what's going on here? It's like all of the debris is being pulled together with this incredible force. And we then sort of get into Hibaru, and he's just thinking like, hey, I've got the primer in my biceps and the gunpowder that ignites in my forearm. And he's like, hey, you better watch out, Shio, because this is my full power. And he goes to aim towards Shio and uses a bare-handed Magnum Blast, Man Kitan, and he goes through and he goes to punch Shio. And we see this creates a massive amount of air force, as we see that, I think her name is, what's the female in this name series? Oh, I forget her name right now. It doesn't really matter. I sort of bad I don't remember this character's name, but we see like Kuran is there, we see that Torazo is also here, and everybody's like getting blown back by this wind pressure that Hibaru has just activated with his Mikaton bare-handed Magnum Blast. And Hibaru, doing this blast, looks over to Shio, and we see that this black ball is there in the center, right? And Tarasu is like, what in the world? How is he able to stop that blast, right? And Shio just says like, hey, that's some formidable power you have there, Hibaru. And Tarasu looks around and just thinks like, oh, he wasn't just collecting debris. He was compressing it into a high-density shield, and the pieces that got chipped off are gathering again. as he realizes Shio has a gravity astro. And Tarazu's like, man, think about the clash of power going on there, right? I feel bad for forgetting her name. I want to call her Hina, but that's what the girl in Tokyo Revenger's name was named, and I don't think it's the same name as it was in there. I can't remember between one Kinwalk work to the other, but Kuran's just like, man, the wind pressure almost blew us all away. As all of a sudden, an elevator appears on the top of this roof, and out of this elevator steps out Satsuki Yotsurugi, advisor to the Yotsurugi family underboss and the second adopted son. And seeing this, Hibaru's like, wait, Satsuki, like, why are you here? And I forget her name, like, I don't remember her name. She just says, like, huh, like, where did he suddenly come from? As Satsuki speaks, just saying, like, hey, Shio, that's enough of playing games for today. And he's like, hey, I've recovered the Daybreak Ore. And Tarazu is like, Daybreak Ore? Like, what is he talking about? And Shio just turns back and looks at Satsuki and just says, like, oh, good. Then our business here is done. And all of a sudden, the black ball, the gravity compressed ball of debris, suddenly falls to the ground and makes a massive crack in the ground. As Hibaru sort of just seeing this, he's like, hey, wait, Shio! And he starts to run over to where Satsuki and Shio are, and all of a sudden, a grate appears in front of Hibaru. It seems like this is the same grate that was on the elevator made by who's his face? Satsuki, but we really don't know whose power this is yet, as Hibaru cannot get through this grate, and he's just like, hey, Shio, what are you trying to do anyway? And Shio turns around and just says, hey, Hibaru, let me tell you one thing. The Yotsurugi family and the meteor strike are far from unrelated. And Hibaru's like, what are you talking about? As all of a sudden we see that Satsuki just says, like, well, here's the item, like, dear Shio, and he holds down his hand, this little item, and she was like, oh, good. And we see that Tarazu notices this, and we see that he may think something about it, but he doesn't quite say anything about it yet. And so Paru's behind these bars saying, like, Shio, it's like, I don't care if you become the boss of our family, as long as you honor the diamond bond between brothers. And we see that everybody sort of takes notes of this. Satsuki looks back at Hibaru. Tarazu's like, oh, Hibaru, and like even Tarazu takes note of this. As all of a sudden, both Shio and Satsuki go back onto that elevator that appeared on top of the roof. And Hibaru just is like, hey, wait, Shio, look at me. As we see that Shio looks down at his hand, and in his hand is that Daybreak Ore possible material. And he looks down and he just thinks, Mom. And eventually he just says, hey, Hibaru, next time you and I meet, one of us will die. And he just thinks to himself, maybe if they weren't Yotsurugis, I maybe could have loved them. As this elevator starts to ascend up into the sky, which of course is going nowhere, and seeing that now Satsuki and Shio have left, Hibaru's like, no, Shio! And that is where we end off this chapter of Astro Royale. This was a great chapter, bringing up so many interesting mysteries. Shio apparently has a gravity power. We get introduced into Satsuki, who's got this elevator astro, which appears from almost nowhere. It's just really interesting. The whole thing of Shio being like, hey, the asteroid and the Yotsurugi family are actually intertwined. It's just all very interesting and something that I am excited to find out about in the future. And for a while there, I really wasn't enjoying Astro Royale because I didn't really feel like there was too much to the series. This chapter has sort of opened up those floodgates, and I feel like there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of this series relatively soon. So yeah, great chapter. But with that, the bus I need to catch is actually now arriving here, so I need to pause this recording again, so I'll see you guys here now, I guess. And we are back, guys. I had a great time. I went out and played some Digimon card game at my local card game store, so that was really fun. Caught the bus and did all of that stuff correctly, but now it is time to get back here and talk about more manga. Of course, like I said earlier, we have 4 more chapters left to get through, so let's just get through these and just see how much longer it takes us. So the next chapter is Akane-banashi, chapter number 124. This chapter is titled Room for Imagination. And this chapter is an insane one. Let's just hop into it. So pretty much Shigema has been doing his whole story of, I do forget what it was called since it has been a week since, I'm pretty sure we only got the chapter title once, but last week was an incredibly good chapter about the gods of death, sort of. And this chapter starts off with Shigema performing on stage, and he just says, like, you want to die, don't you? I can show you how. I am a god of death. Of course, this is what the god of death character is saying in this moment, right? And the regular guy just says, like, god of death? And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, damn it. So is it your fault that I thought about dying back there? Like, come on, get lost, you pox. And the god of death just goes and says, like, hey, don't be so cold and cruel. There's more than you realize that binds the two of us together. You need money, don't you? And I have an idea in mind that you might find very fruitful for the future. Be a doctor. Anyone whose spirit grows heavy ends up haunted by a god of death. If the god of death sits their head, then that's a sign that the patient's time has come. You mustn't fight that god of death, but if it stands at their feet, just recite this magic spell. Ajaraka, Mokurin, Kyu Raisu, Teketsu no Pa. Speak these words, clap twice, and your patient will recover in no time at all. And after the god of death says this, we get a really good image of Shigema here as he repeats this sort of spell language that the god of death just told this one character, and we don't even get the sound of Shigema clapping, or we don't get it in this one panel, but the way that he sort of looks at the god of death through the paneling layout, the way that Shigema acts out his craft is amazing, as we just hear the Akajara, Mokurisen, Kurataise, Tekurat, Setrapa, no Pa, and then just and then Shigema just continues on with narration. And then the god of death was gone. And then he just narrates more about this character in detail, as he just says, like, hey, as it had suggested, the man opened a doctor's clinic. All of the patients who came to him had gods of death clinging to their feet. And we just see him recite that spell once again. I don't want to butcher the Japanese language even more, so let's mute Discord there. He just repeats the magic spell again and just says, like, hey, with his newfound reputation for curing any illness, the doctor was living happy in a lap of luxury, but the pride Goth before all. He spent his fortune too freely and was poor once again, and this time he broke his promise to the god of death. As we see that this man is once out in the field again before, and the god of death visits him again. And he just says, like, why would you do such a foolish thing? I warned you, don't bother a god of death sitting at a patient's head. And he just says, like, hey, but you waited for it to fall asleep, and then spun the bed around and cast a spell to make it go away. And the guy just says, like, hey, I knew it wasn't the right thing to do, but still, like, look how much he paid me for it. Like, I can give you as much of this money as you want, just don't punish me. As we see that he has a bunch of coins in his hands, or at least we see in this image here, as Shigema sort of holds out his hands to the crowd, and we see just a amount of stuff right there, right? And we see that the god of death just looks at this guy and just says, come with me. And the guy says, come with you? And he's like, to this dreary cave? And he's like, please, no, there isn't even a light in here. Like, you want me to hold your cane, like, and it will guide me along? And at this point, we cut away to Gakuman, who, of course, is here, and is sort of, I don't know what to say that he is our perspective character for Shigema's story here, because he isn't. That is the entire audience. That's sort of the point of Shigema's performance. But Gakuman just sort of thinks, like, hey, with just a minimum of speech and gestures, he shows you an entire world. As we suddenly see, like, Shigema push out his hands and act like he's grabbing onto the cane, and he suddenly lurches forward as he says, like, oh no, wait, as of course he's being pulled by the god of death. So we then see like characters like Mumbo and like a bunch of just other various scenes as Gakumon just continues saying like, hey, he shows you the entire world and draws you deep into it. Between Nin and humorous wrinkles, too many Rakugoka try to add color to the stories, but Master Shiguma's brilliance lies in the opposite approach. The beauty of subtraction. And we get a visual of a bonsai tree that, of course, its beauty is in subtraction too, as you trim it to make it into whatever you see fit, right? And at this point, we just get more narration into story by Shiguma, as it just goes like, so the god of death brought him to a pitch-black cave deep beneath the earth, where it suddenly opened up into a vast cavern that was like standing upon the shore of an open sea. From there, he could see candles gleaming brightly in the darkness. Not just one or two candles, but an entire blanket of them, covering every surface. A sea of fire. As all of a sudden, we get a little bit of a flashback to where Shiguma was teaching Akane some Rakugo tips back in the day when she was really young. And Shiguma pretty much just asked like Akane, like, hey, do you know why Rakugoka sit in this formal position? And Akane's like, well, is it to be more polite? And Shiguma says like, that's part of the reason, but morally, it immobilizes a person's lower half. And he pretty much explains, like, hey, by immobilizing your lower half, you have to be much more expressive to show off your Rakugo skills, as props are not something that are easily used. And he's like, it leaves you open to have more imagination being able to flow out. And Akane sort of thinks to whenever she was watching her dad perform in the first chapter, and she saw sort of all of the Rakugo spirits appearing around him. And he just tells Akane that, and Akane sort of like takes that into her mind, right? And eventually Shiguma just says like, hey, you'll one day be able to pull it off yourself. The human imagination is vast and boundless, as we get an incredible 2-page spread of the entire Rakugo theater. And this visual is, we see all the people sitting in seats, but we see that it's almost turned into a cave landscape around them, as there's a bunch of candles, this sea of fire that Shiguma is currently explaining in the story of all the candles in the cave. And he's pretty much projecting this onto the minds of everybody who is listening to his story, right? And we just cut around to a lot of people and just see that everybody's so entranced in the story, as Gakumon just says to Akane, like, hey, watch closely now. Your master doesn't bring people here without good reason. You'll surely see that his performance holds a special meaning for you. And Akane looks out to Shiguma as she just sees him sort of sitting on the ground with the candles all around him in the cave. This is an incredible chapter of Akane-banashi. Last chapter was amazing, and it's at points like these where I'm like, this is one of the most inspirational manga I've ever read. Because you take this topic of Rakugo, which isn't really that interesting, and you branch it out into this massive and large landscape. And the whole thing last time of like Shiguma the tearjerker, he could kill 100 people in the entire theater in a fire if one was to break out. It is just I just am praising this chapter way too much, but the thing is, there is so much to actually praise about it. This is an amazing chapter, and you just cannot get around that. But going to another chapter, there's Blue Box, chapter number 162. This chapter is titled, It Might Work Out. Pretty much last time in Blue Box, one of these guys was proposing to, what's her name? Why can I not remember her name? Oh gosh, we're gonna go to the Blue Box Wiki real quick. Blue Box Wiki. Not to try to draw this out any longer, but I feel like it's very important that I remember her name. Ayame. Yeah, Ayame. Ayame got proposed to by some random guy. Pretty much what happens there is the guy's like, hey, you don't have to think about it now, but just like give me an answer by the time I get back in school. And she's like, okay. She runs by Kyo, who is just standing there and sort of sees how this is, and she sort of thinks like, hey, why should I wait for a relationship that's going nowhere because it might work out? She's like, no, it's better to be with a person who says they like me, because of course she's going after Kyo, but Kyo hasn't shown any feelings or anything, and she's just like, that's how things are. We see a bunch of school festival stuff as we get the idea that a lot of classes are starting time for the school festival. We get a really funny joke here as we see that Hina's class, of course, has Taiki, Kyo, and our other like main cast in it. They are doing a haunted house this year, right? And we see that Hina is in this haunted house, is playing sort of the narrator character who narrates all the people as they go through it, right? And Taiki comes in with a stick that has a string attached to it. On the end of the string is a sponge. And we see that he sort of smacks that sponge into Hina's face. And Hina gets a little freaked out by it, right? And she's like, what do you think that is, right? And Taiki's like, do you think this will actually scare some of the attendees? And they pretty much get talking about it. And Hina pretty much says, like, hey, the only way it may work is the atmosphere of the area, right? As she starts to tell this really scary story, like, hey, in the depths of the night, a taxi driver picked up a woman. He thought it was a strange time to be needing a ride, and when he got to the destination, she was gone from his back seat. A bad feeling washed over him, and whenever he was making a U-turn, a hand crept up from behind him. And all of a sudden, we see that Kyo goes and hits Taiki with this sponge on a stick, and Taiki, like, screams, like, wah! Like, really freaking out about all of this, right? Pretty much showing you, yeah, atmosphere is everything. Yusa suddenly walks into the room, and he's like, hey, Taiki, my class doesn't have anything to do for the sports school festival right now because we're short on materials, so do you want to go do some rallies with me? And Taiki's like, yeah, let's go. But Hina sort of pulls him back and just says, like, hey, we've got things to do and prepare, so, like, don't be going off and doing all of this stuff. And I think Hina's friend, I think her name is Nina, if I'm not mistaken, says, like, hey, like, I'm sure if you looked hard enough, you could find something to do for your class. But Yusa's just like, hey, I don't have the energy for that. Because of the culture festival, we won't be able to use the gym for a while, which means I'm going to suffer in my, what's it called thing. And we see that Hina, like, and a few other people are a little upset about all of that, right? That's really all there is to it, and Hina has a little bit of a moment looking at Yusa, who of course said something about liking Hina a few chapters ago, more than a few chapters ago. Taiki's off doing something for the his class, as all of a sudden a person in a cat costume walks up behind him and gestures to him, and Taiki's like, a cat? What is this? It's revealed here in a second that a cat is actually Chinatsu-senpai, and Taiki's like, oh man, you're my girlfriend, right? And it's pretty much explained that Chinatsu's class is holding a stamp rally, where pretty much there's going to be a bunch of people dressed up in different costumes around a school, and you can go to each one of them and get a stamp from them. And Chinatsu says, like, hey, if you collect them all, you get a prize. And she's like, you should do it, Taiki. And Taiki says, like, well, what's the prize? And Chinatsu's like, well, it's a free school. But before she can finish that, she just says, I'll actually think about it, sort of saying that she'll give Taiki a specific prize if he actually does it, right? And she didn't ask him if he likes spicy food. She was just like, are you also preparing a punishment for if I lose this? Which is a little bit of a funny little thing. And then they have a cute moment where they're just like, man, getting to talk at school like this really makes me happy. And the two of them just like blush and smile at each other. And then everybody inside of the school just like looks at Taiki and says like, Taiki, you stole our Kano away. We will never forgive you. A little bit of a weird thing for these people to be like, you stole this girl that doesn't belong to any of us, but I mean, whatever. At this point, we see that Ayame is texting with the boy who asked her out earlier. His name is apparently Shota, and she's like, man, he's a nice guy. And there's a little bit of a joke where one of the badminton players just is like, oh, who are you texting, Ayame, your boyfriend? And she's like, oh, shut up, right? Now we see another player eventually who's just like talking to Ko and beside of it, and is like, hey, Kyo, you said you're not interested in having a girlfriend, right? And Kyo's just like, well, if I didn't say that, everybody would be on my case about it, right? And we don't know if Ayame hears that or not, but it's sort of a weird thing to get brought up. Last page of the chapter, or last few pages, Kyo is walking home, and as he walks up to his apartment, he turns the corner and hears some screaming going on. This screaming is coming from his neighbor, oh no, Saki. Yes, Saki is her name, and Saki's previous boyfriend. They're in a little bit of an argument, right? And Saki's like, hey, you cheated on me, remember? And the boyfriend's like, just hear me out. And she's like, oh, forget it. And she's like, we broke up, so quit stalking me like this. And Kyo walks up, and he's just like, stalking? What's going on here? And Saki just like runs over to Kyo's side, and she says, "Just leave already," to the boyfriend, as she grabs Kyo's arm and just says like, "Hey, this is the person I like now. It's this guy." And this is where we end off this chapter, is with this sort of going on, and we see that Kyo looks over to Saki like, huh? And we then just get a panel of Ayame, who is drinking a sports drink that was recommended to her earlier in the chapter by the guy she was texting with, named Shota. And that's where we end off this chapter of Blue Box. Gosh, these teenagers have some really messy relationships. That's really all there is to it. I'll be interested to see where this goes going forward, but just really nothing. I have nothing to say about it now, because it's truly something where Blue Box is always good, always consistent, and it'll just be like, what's going to happen next? And that's really all there is to it. 2 chapters left. In this chapter, next chapter, I'm going to go through very quickly because it is very boring. It is the Elusive Samurai, chapter number 170. So I start with this chapter. Shina's still fighting a bunch of people. Kojiro tries to get her to retreat, and then Kojiro picks her up and uses her body as a weapon while they retreat, and Shina blushes because of this. The Kusunoki brothers, who are under the tutelage of Akie, if I'm not mistaken, end up running away, as we see that their house is completely burned down. Some retainers and people are upset about that. Morino is still alive, and he's just like, "Hey, sing Takeuji-sama, dispelled all of my doubt. I will burn all gods and Buddhas but him." We get some other stuff, is like the maps and stuff, like saying people leave here, people do this. And then Tokiyuki and his allies fled to Yoshino to the seat of the Southern Court, as we get chapter title, Yoshino 1338. We see the Southern Court, and we see there's a massive thing going on with Emperor Go-Dio and a bunch of people. We meet Akie's father, named Kitabatake Chikafusa. Pretty much Go-Dio pretty much says like, "Hey, because of your child's actions, you'll receive a extraordinary award, but being as that no new lands were acquired on this last conquest, the gifts will be a little bit meeker. He talks to another one of Akie's people, Date Utakamo, and he pretty much, for supporting Akie for a bunch of times, he awards him money and 3 treasure swords and a upgrade in a social rank during this time too. And pretty much this guy is just like, Date's like, "Hey, this sucks. I didn't get promoted as much as I was hoping to, but with all of the time we got to spend with Akie, it was sort of worth it." Next up is Nita, and Nita apparently slayed a bunch of people. There's a letter from Akie saying so. So pretty much Nita is bestowed a new name from Emperor Go-Dio, Nita Yoshitoki, and is given a special kanji to put in a name, which we get a little bit of an explanation to saying like, "Hey, Emperor Go-Dio excelled at verbal subtleties. By granting impressive kanji characters, he made many warriors happy, and thus he earned loyalty without granting any land or wealth." As we see that he has given one of these to Takeuji before, right? And Takeuji is like, "Yep, my loyalty shot way up." So, sort of is what it is. Next up is Tokiyuki. Pretty much Tokiyuki is wearing the hairpiece crown of Akie. Why do we need more images of Akie in the story? We just need Akie to like disappear. And he pretty much badmouths the Mikado or Emperor Go-Dio. And it's a bit of a big thing. All of the warriors are all upset, like, "Hey, you angered Mikado, like, what are you thinking?" and all of this. But some of the like people like Kojiro is like, "Man, I love it when you go rogue on us like this. It makes life really fun." We see a few other warriors and stuff talk to Tokiyuki. Sorry, there's not really much in this chapter that's interesting or good. And then the Lord Chikafusa, who is Akie's father, appears and just says like, "Hey, I have got orders that you are to attend His Highness alone. The Mikado has a special task for you," right? As we cut to the final 2 pages of the chapter, where the Emperor or the Mikado just is like, "Hey, this morning I received these watershed plants," and Tokiyuki's like, "Man, it looks delicious, right?" And Tokiyuki explains that he often ate this in Shinano. and the silky texture tastes really good. And Mikado just says like, hey, in that case, suggest me a good food to go with it. Guess what I desire to eat this moment? A wrong answer means you die. And Tokyuki's like, what? And that's where we end off this chapter of Elusive Samurai. I'm happy Akie is finally dead, because Akie was not an entertaining part of the story. But at the same point, it's like, where do we go from here? Like, I don't necessarily know, and like, how do we continue to make this interesting? Yeah, not really a whole lot to say there, but there's a lot I have to say about this next chapter, because this next chapter is Witch Watch chapter number 169. We are getting very close to being to chapter 200 on this great and amazing series called Witch Watch. I love Witch Watch. It's probably my favorite manga in Jump at any particular week. So, yeah, so of course last chapter in Witch Watch we had the introduction of, what was her name again? I had it pulled up earlier. Mi Tsuchiya, who we learned was another summoner witch who had summoned a genie to help her out in the past. And we also know that she's just called Chami by her stage name, as we pretty much see that there's going to be a time where Chami is coming over here to the Otegi house, and of course is going to teach Nico some interesting magic. We see that Morito's a little bit like, man, like having a celebrity over like really gets the nerves going, and like not to mention that she's a 10-year-old girl too, like I'm not sure how I'm going to interact with her, right? And eventually he's just like, maybe a mature and proper introduction is the correct way to go, as the doorbell rings and they walk over to open a door, and we see the genie, who is of course named Slump, is there in front of the door, and he's like, hello, it is an honor to meet you. I am Slump, a genie, right? And he's just like, hey, it's not much, but we brought a gift to you. They exchange gifts, and they just start to talk a little about, as Otegi's just like, as Morito's just like, hey, it's an honor to make your acquaintance, Miss Tsuchiya. And she's like, oh, I'll quit it. You're the one being too formal here. Just call me Chami. I'm glad to meet you guys, right? And she walks into the house and just says like, so I heard you guys had a lot of familiars living here, but I don't see anybody. As Morito pretty much explains that with the knowledge that they were going to have a literal child celebrity come to the house, that he pretty much sent the rest of the people out of the house to go watch a movie with manatee pricing, which is just really funny, as we see that, yeah, Miharu, Kan, Keigo, and Bon all had to leave and go do that instead of hanging around a house around a child celebrity, right? And he's just like, yeah, they'd make too much of a big fuss, so we wouldn't be able to talk, so it's honestly the best thing that we sent him away, right? And pretty much there's a little bit of a joke here where Morito's like, hey, would either of you like a drink? Chami does not need one, but he asks Slump, and Slump's like, yeah, I would like some coffee. He's just like, I take it black. And then we see that both Slump and Morito sort of bond a little bit over special coffee beans and methods for making coffee, right? They eventually sit down and they have a little bit of a discussion about who is able to see Slump, as Morito pretty much just says like, so interesting, only people of magic can actually see Slump, and he's just like, I can see you, but you are slightly transparent to me. And of course, Nico's like, hey, I can see you very clearly, right? So, very interesting here. They just go back and forth a little bit, as they just talk about like how powerful Slump is and his like best abilities, as Chami just says like, yeah, he's very good in a fight, he is strong, fast, and accurate, but he can't really get that far from where I am, right? And Morito's just like, hey, isn't that like a stand? And before he can finish the word stand, he gets cut off. Very, very funny joke of saying to like, yeah, okay, this is obviously like sort of a ripoff from JoJo's, but it is what it is. And Chami's like, hey, don't say that, he's just a genie. And then Morito says, so okay, you're star platinum. And at the same point, Chami's like, hey, he's not star platinum, he's Slump. And so Morito's like, okay, so then Slump is your bodyguard then. And Slump is like, yes, I take full advantage of my form special abilities to protect Chami. And he pretty much explains that he does a bunch of odd jobs for her. Like he protects her from fans who won't meet up when the time is done at meet and greets, right? And he's just like, yeah, you only have 10 seconds to speak for her. And we see a little panel of this invisible guy taking away this one guy who's getting a signature from Chami or something, right? And then there's a bunch of other things where we go back and forth here, where it's like, hey, Slump, he is very good at getting ice cream, and he's very good at being a hero. He's like, hey, put up my hair, like, give me a massage, and like, man, you are like really her servant, Slump. And it's just like, hey, and like, set a timer for 3 minutes, Slump, and it's like, you're almost like a living Alexa, like, what's going on here, right? And eventually they just continue to go back and forth until we get sort of the main plot of this is like, all right, so Miss Ibuki wants Chami to be Nico's magic tutor, right? And Chami pretty much says that Miss Ibuki specifically wants her to help Nico with meditation, with her mental training, right? And Morito thinks about it and thinks like, oh yeah, of course, whenever Nico is older, she always used to do all of that interesting meditation stuff. And, of course, while she's a child, she hasn't been doing it because Morito doesn't really know much about it and doesn't particularly know how to help her, which is a little bit of interesting. Like, yeah, as much as a joke of Witch Watch is that Morito is perfect, he's also not perfect at the same time, right? As pretty much we just get explained, like, hey, magic is almost all about imagination at a certain point, and you have to vision all of the situations when doing it, all the various conditions you could be in, and even the effects your spells could have on people. And repeating these mental stimulations over and over again hones and focuses your magic power. So, of course, for a witch like Nico, who is the Witch of Thousands, it is very important, right? And eventually, they pretty much gets onto an idea of, like, what kind of witch are you, Chami? And we eventually see that Slump is like, hey, allow me to explain. And he pretty much just goes through Chami's backstory here, right? Pretty much that she's always been a child who's been a popular actress and wasn't very happy at certain points in her life. And eventually, whenever she was getting a little sad and depressed about her situation and not being able to really do much besides for being an actor, we see that she would often feel down on herself. And she would always get, like, thoughts in her head of, like, an imaginary friend who were just telling her to do very good. And there's a little nice thing here is we just see that a young Chami's like, man, this is a period drama, like, this is, like, way too high level for me. And this voice just says, like, hey, you'll be fine, I know you can do it. And Chami's like, oh man, that same old praise. And they just go back and forth until eventually Chami just says, like, hey, you know, I bet that you probably want a name. If you'd like, and the spirit's like, hey, if you'd like to name me, please feel free, I'm only imaginary after all. And eventually Chami just says, like, hey, let's see, you always seem to show up when I'm in a slump, so let's name you Slump. So, of course, we know this is where our character Slump actually comes from. And we eventually see that Chami gets a little depressed even more and still thinks about who's his face, thinks about her career, and then also talks to Slump, until eventually one day she's out walking the streets, and Miss Ibuki appears in front of her, and she's just like, hey, thank goodness I just arrived in time, I received a prophecy about you, if nothing changes, you'll fall and become a warlock, like, you've power sleeping within you, and you must learn to become a witch. We then see that Ibuki took Chami and her mother and brought him to the witch's village, where we pretty much where she trained and Chami and eventually taught her how to be a witch, pretty much, right? And there's a little bit of explanation that comes around from that until eventually she one day summons Slump, right? And whenever this happens, she's like, whoa, who are you? And Slump's like, hello, I'm the genie that you summoned. And she's like, a genie? And the genie just is like, hey, but I've been with you for a long time, for years now. I've been by your side. I am Slump, and it is my honor to finally meet you in person. And we see that Chami cries a little bit, right? And that's really all there is to it. The whole joke here at the same time is that the genie Slump was telling all of this in like a theater stage play sort of deal. But as they talk about it, eventually Slump became her official familiar, and yada 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 yay. But Chami just says like, hey, as long as Slump's always by my side, that is enough. He is my very good friend. As all of a sudden, sorry, it's getting ready to really rain outside my dorm. I almost need to close the window, but I'm going to finish up this chapter first. Nico is just like, hey, I want to be your friend too, Chami. And Chami's like, sure, I'd love to have a witch as a friend. And we're just like, hey, I look good to seeing you guys again in the future. And everybody's like giving their condolences. But as soon as they're getting ready to leave, there is some unlocking of the door as we see the rest of the guys from the household are finally getting home. And as they get here, Khan's the first one in the house, and he walks in and he's like, "We're home," and he's like, "Wait, what the heck? Why is Chami here?" As all of a sudden Slump gets up and he's like, "I am Slump, Chami's protector." And eventually we see what ends up happening here is that Slump makes him get in a greeting line and tells him that they only have 10 seconds to speak with Chami, right? And Morito ends off the chapter of a joke just saying like, "Hey, for a genie, he really did get all of the mundane jobs." Ba-da-ba-da-da-bum-bum. And with that, that is where we end this chapter of Witch Watch, and at the same time, we end talking about these 13 series of manga. This felt like it took way too long, but I really felt like it's good because I said everything I really wanted to say about all of these series, so I'm very happy about that as we did that. But of course, being that this is my Shonen Jump series, we now need to talk about what was the best chapter of the week, and of course, what was also the worst chapter of the week. So I actually have not ranked any of these yet, so I figured I'd do it live here on camera, and I also figured, why not actually record this so you guys can see the spreadsheet and sort of see what we're doing here while we mess with it. So we're quickly going to move back, and we are, I should have planned out this earlier and did just not think about that 20 seconds ago, but we are going to come here and we are just going to record the screen. We're going to get ready to record, and we're going to record this tab right here. All right, so you guys see the spreadsheet here right now. Let's just get to it. So first off, these are in the order of what I read them in this week. I definitely think the worst chapter this week was the Elusive that's not Elusive Samurai. I definitely think it was one of the worst chapters this week. It just wasn't interesting. And with that, also Kill Blue. It just wasn't good, all things considered. As we look at this next, we're going to rank them by like what chapters were at the top and what chapters were also more of at the bottom. These chapters all the way up here at the top are already sort of staying there. Akane-banashi also deserves to be up there, and I think the rest are more in that middling category. I am personally think I'm going to give the chapter this week to Undead Unluck. It has been awesome to see Andy back, and as much as I want to give Andy the character of the week, I think I'm actually going to give it to Megumi from Jujutsu Kaisen this week. I don't know why. I can't show manga pages on screen or else I'm going to get demonetized and I'm going to get this video taken off YouTube. Let's not do that. I really like Megumi, seeing everything he did in the chapter, so that was really cool, and also just seeing the whole thing of like, hey, I wasted your dad, Megumi, sorry. Oh my gosh, it was so incredibly funny. But besides that, I think it was probably like Jujutsu Kaisen. Kaisen was the next best chapter, probably put it at 4th. I think next we're going to put Akane-banashi next. It was also just an amazing chapter. As far as chapters on the bottom go, I think I'm now thinking about Kyokuto Necromance, Necro, if I could actually spell. It didn't really have much going for it, and also being that it was the final chapters, I've got it marked down here. It just wasn't the best, all things considered, and it really sort of sucks, because I really would have loved to see more out of the series. I think next has to be Kagurabachi, just a really good chapter. I think after that we're going to go with an Astro Royale, just a really fun chapter. I really love seeing Shio's power, and just the ending off on that chapter of Hibaru just being like, what am I supposed to do now? I really think next is probably Ruri Dragon, maybe, and then we'll put, I don't know, at this point it's sort of just like whatever works. Witch Watch, then we'll Hima-Ten, Blue Box, and Open Extras, Kiyoshi. I think I'm going to put I really did like Hima-Ten, though. Yeah, we're just going to put it, I think all things considered, there were some better chapters than it, than Kiyoshi. Good chapter. And finally, that leaves Blue Box in that spot right there. And as the rankings for this week, starting off with Undead Unluck, then going to Akane-banashi, Kagurabachi, Jujutsu Kaisen, Astro Royale, Ruri Dragon, Witch Watch, Blue Box, Ultimate Exorcist, Kiyoshi, Hima-Ten, Kyokuto Necromance, Blue Box, and Elusive Samurai. Of course, with Megumi being the character of the week, and in the extra notes, you Kyokuto Necromance has ended, which means that next week we are going to be starting up new series as well. Like I said, don't count on me actually having up a new video next week. I was just able to this week. My roommate has not been here for the Labor Day weekend, so don't have to worry about that. And also just, I have had nothing else to do, and I really love this issue of, well, I mean, I can't show pages. I forget about that. I'm certainly sharing my screen, so we're going to stop sharing real quick, but really, really good chapters and all of that stuff this week. And yeah, of course, the cover of the chapter you'll see on the screen right now. And yeah, with that, thank you guys for watching. This was really fun to do. I feel like this is going to be really long, which means it's going to be really annoying to edit at the same time. So I would be happy if you guys would watch this and say, hey, I'm going to share this with a friend and share it with somebody. That really does a lot to help me out. Or maybe subscribe to the channel, like the video, or just doing any of those things. Anything small really just helps me out in the long run. And if you guys would like to see more of this series in the future whenever I actually feel like it, like, this is not like what the Kagurabachi or Oshinoko chapter reviews where it's like, I will do this for every chapter. This is like, if I really, really feel like it, I may. So, yeah, thank you guys so very much for watching again, and I'll catch you guys next time. Of course, this has been Weekly Shonen Jump, issue number 40 of 2024, and yeah, I'll see you guys next time. This is going to be Glowplasma 231, signing out.